Hello, everyone. We're just going to get started because I understand we're running late. So welcome to this session on investing in women's football. I'm Valerie Goldstein. I'm a private equity lawyer and senior advisor at Livida Sport. And I also produce and co-host a new podcast called the Women's Football Finance Podcast. It's a very creative name. Shameless plug, if you've got space for one more podcast in your lives, please do have a listen. But we'll kick things off. I would love it if you guys could just quickly say a word about your background, your role in the industry, a quick intro, if that's okay. I'll start with you, Mario.
Absolutely, and very excited to be here. My name is Mario Malave. I am one of the co-founders and co-CEOs of Mercury 13. We are an aspiring MCO in the women's space, so we're trying to acquire majority stakes in professional women's football clubs, and I run all of our investment efforts at the group.
My name's Jackie Oatley. I'm a football commentator and sports presenter. Been around a few years now. Was one of the original board members of Women in Football back in 2007 with the amazing Anna Kessel, who is here, and Shelley Alexander as well. And it's wonderful to see how much this has grown. I started initially at the BBC in sort of early 2000s, men's football, and then started women's football commentary as well. And I've always done men's and women's football commentary and presenting domestically major tournaments. So it's been really interesting to see how it's grown over the years. I'm commentating on the Champions League match tonight and tomorrow night for TNT Sports. So just having seen how the women's game has grown over these years, and abroad as well, doing the major tournaments. And the last couple of years, I've been commentating in the US for CBS on the NWSL as well. So I'll maybe touch on that and the experience of seeing how they do things, how we do things, what we can learn from each other. It's been really interesting to see.
Brilliant. And Luca.
Yeah, not as great at talking about myself, to be fair, but my name's Luca. I lead the women's division Europe for Wasserman, working with talent across Europe, specifically in the women's game. We've been a part of Wasserman now. It's about our 1-year anniversary. So I was here last year running my own agency, and then got acquired shortly after. So we have one year with the big guns, and looking to continue growing since 2018. So yeah.
Great.
Hi everybody, I'm Rowena Samarasinha. I am the founder and managing director of Gen Sport. My background is commercializing international sport, but last year I worked to raise an investment fund focused on women's sport, and we came very close to rescuing a very famous French women's football team, and that experience, for the brief moment that I was running it, led me to bring together a team of experts in growth and transformation, from sport, from international sport and growth transformation industries, but to really focus on the opportunity in women's sport. And we are united by this vision of the opportunity and how we can do things differently in the space.
Hi everyone, I'm Maria Shing. I'm head of investments and corporate development at Brera Holdings, which is a publicly traded multi-club ownership group investing in both men's and women's sports. My background is a mix of private equity investment banking, but also in the past couple of years focused on football. And I'm also a proud member of the WIF membership committee, so it's really great to see all of you turn out here today.
Great. Well, we'll get started then. So there has been unprecedented growth in the women's game over the last 5 years or so. And that has, unsurprisingly, attracted financial investors towards the women's game. And we have two investors here now in Mario and Maria. And so I would love to have you guys talk about, so we'll go to you first, Mario. So we'd love to hear about the Mercury 13 investment thesis, the key strategies that you guys are deploying to ideally make money out of owning women's teams, and why you're pursuing an MCO model.
Yeah, happy to, and definitely make money. And I say that proudly because none of what we do is really trying to be a not-for-profit. Like, we generally think women's football is an amazing business. And I think a lot of our focus and everything that we do, from which teams we acquire, how we operate them, how we've structured the group, is based on unlocking the potential. I think one of the biggest double standards when it comes to women's football is it's always, the men's side is measured on potential, the women's side is measured on production, and that's deeply, deeply unfair because women's football is a startup. It needs capital, it needs dedicated management, it needs time to flourish. So everything we do is trying to provide that and unlock that commercial growth. We have decided to structure as an MCO, which when you hear even the word MCO, multi-club ownership, you immediately think Man City, Red Bull, these big organizations. When we think of our version of MCO for women's football, it's really about trying to justify or rationalize more upfront investment that can be spread across a lot of properties. So that's really the key of why we're an MCO, is we're essentially trying to justify financially with what are today small teams, but that we don't think will remain small for longer, putting more money up front in order to unlock more growth resources for these clubs.
Got it. And Maria, if you could talk about Brera. Obviously, you guys are structured differently. You have a listing on the NASDAQ. And so if you wouldn't mind saying a word about that structure and what that means for potential investors who might be looking to invest in women's football, but perhaps coming through a different route.
Yeah, of course. So just to dial it back to some of the macro trends that are happening in the financial markets right now, there is kind of a thesis, especially that American investors have realized, that sports assets relative to equities, the debt markets, they're always appreciating no matter what, because you could be in a recession, but you never really lose your fandom and your ties to sport because it's recession-proof. So Brera, as a publicly traded entity, the thesis is that we could also be recession-proof, especially as a way for investors to protect themselves from the rest of their portfolio investments. But on the other side, there's also this increased thesis of fan engagement and ways to monetize and bring your fans into part of this story. And this is something that has resonated with a few of the clubs that we've looked at, because even with certain acquisition rumors on the market, we've had fans reach out to us on LinkedIn and be like, "Oh, I saw that you were potentially interested in acquiring our team. I've just bought some of your shares." So it's a combination of both sports as an asset class that funds like Arctos and Blue Owl are dialing into, and then it's also a combination of engaging fans in a new, more creative way.
Got it. So I can buy your shares,
Yes.
I can hold them for a little while, and then I can sell them,
Exactly.
as in when I want,
Yes.
is the idea. So maybe you could just say...
Yeah, so that's a
importance of
portion
that.
of the market that is publicly traded. We also issue private placements when we're seeking specific financing for acquisition capital. So we use the NASDAQ platform as a listing to actually raise money to acquire the teams that we're looking at.
Thank you. So Mario, just back to you for a sec. When the Mercury 13 team is considering investing in a new club, and you guys have looked at lots of clubs now, what are the key criteria that you are deploying or that you're using when trying to make that new investment? How are you trying to create value?
Yeah, so we typically structure it across 6 pillars, so 5 or 6 pillars. We focus a lot on the first 3, which are football. So you want to make sure the team has obviously what's happening in the pitch and a decent football operation, and typically the right infrastructure to build an even better football operation. Second bucket's commercial. We put a lot of emphasis on making sure that all the right ingredients needed to have a successful commercial strategy are there. So can we build a brand? Can we market the brand? Can we elevate the rights that are being sold, the way that they're being sold, packaged? Third consideration is the league that they're in. So when you buy a club, you're really coming into a bigger setting and context, such as the league, and then how is the league run, who's running it, and that changes, especially in Europe, which is where we specialize. There are very different markets at different stages. Third is the team or the partner that we're getting into. So I think a staple of our deals is that we try to keep the management, or at least the ownership group there, still with us in the journey. So we're not typically coming in, buying 100% of the shares and kicking out the owners. We're actually trying to convince that owners that there's 2 more decades of growth ahead and that they should be a part of the journey with us. And the last piece is the community surrounding the team, which I think later on we'll talk about this tension between global and local. Making sure that these teams are surrounded by a community that embraces them is really important. So really everything we do in a traditional diligence process is really focused on those 5 buckets. And the 6th is the deal structure, which is more my job, just to make sure that the terms are right and that we're incentivizing everyone properly.
So where to next then? What markets are you targeting? Leagues? Are you allowed to say anything about where you guys want to invest next?
Absolutely. I'm trying not to spoil the surprise, but we've made it no secret. We're on a mission to try to establish the presence in the 5 top leagues in Europe, which are first, maybe let me start there. About a year ago, we acquired one of the only independent teams in the top division in Italy called Como Women. If you don't follow us, please go follow us, because we've been working really hard on transforming that team. The 2 markets that we're really focused on right now are Spain and the UK. We've made that no secret. When we say market, we really look at the entire pyramid. So it could be a top division, second, when we honestly look at opportunities even further down. And then I think in a 3rd wave, we'll probably start branching out, looking at France, Germany, or potentially other interesting markets across Europe.
Got it. Maria, I'll ask you the same 2 questions. What are the criteria that you guys apply when looking for a new investment, and where are you headed next in women's football?
Absolutely. I think Mario, honestly, with the 6 pillars, covered it pretty well. But the interesting thing about multi-club ownership is that you're not going to find a club out there that checks all 6 of those boxes, 10 out of 10. So it's more about how all the puzzle pieces fit together as opposed to an individual piece. So it might be that a club that is part of your portfolio has really strong infrastructure, excellent facilities, and that can be leveraged as a driver to bring talent to the team. But then that team might be weaker commercially than a team based in a major metropolitan city where there's access to a lot of sponsorship dollars. So yeah, when we think about creating that puzzle, it's about how we can leverage synergies across the entire ecosystem of clubs we own. And I think, that's generally how we look at it. In terms of geographies that we're looking at next, similar competitive markets, I would say that it does come with its challenges, though, because all these leagues are, even in the past 2-3 years, the legal structures are completely changing. So you want to be as proactive, but in a way, you also have to be a little bit reactive to what the market is dictating.
So I'd like to chat a bit about investment barriers in the women's game and sustainability. So Rowena, I'll go to you first on this, but I'd like to get your thoughts on what you see as the biggest barriers to investment in the women's game. Perhaps why we're not seeing as much private capital coming in as fast and furiously as perhaps leagues and teams would like. And whether you think that it's possible for women's football to be sustainable without some kind of meaningful cost controls.
Yes, I think my view is that the model for sport needs change across the board. In no other industry would you see such massive investment in businesses that essentially lose money. And obviously there's the emotional tie, which is really important, but at some point the costs outweigh the benefits. And I think with women's sport, there is this perception that yes, it's a low entry point, there's this massive opportunity, but it's a long tail. Like there's a lot of investment that you need to put in to get to that point, which makes investors nervous, quite honestly. And so that whole narrative around actually how you can lead with a sustainable business model first and actually use the opportunity in women's sport to make change, lead from that across the industry. And I think I often talk about the comparison with rugby because back in '95, the sport went professional and there was this real excitement about the opportunity and probably it was excitement about the future opportunity rather than that at the time. And I always say we should use that as a bit of a learning curve because now, 30 years onwards, the clubs haven't caught up, the industry hadn't caught up with the spending. And a lot of these clubs have now gone bankrupt. And I think it's really important that we walk before we run. And so from my perspective, I think the clubs that I'm looking at and where we're looking at sort of supporting is actually those where we see real interesting opportunities in, you mentioned the fandom piece, locations, and where you can really make a difference, but really leading with that sustainable business model first approach.
And Maria, I don't know if you want to add anything to that, but as an owner, do you think that you can sort of ask private investors to invest, to deficit fund women's teams for an indefinite period if there aren't cost controls? Or do you think introducing cost controls at this really early stage of the women's game and its development would potentially choke off investment?
I think that covers a really interesting topic, which is around the storytelling of how different funds, different investment groups are set up. And for us as a MCO in both men's and women's, we can kind of offer it as a package deal. Obviously, there's pros and cons to doing both. It might be more sellable to your traditional investors to pick a certain route over the other. But I think the tide is kind of changing in terms of what institutional investors are looking at. Just coming from a business perspective, usually when you think about valuation of teams, of clubs, you look at precedent transactions, but women's football is really like the Wild West at the moment. There's so much momentum, so much capital that's flowing in from the US, but there are still things that need to be worked out and fixed. And I think, it is kind of a trial by error, but that's kind of where groups like Mercury 13 and Caniska are really being innovators in this space.
So I'd like to look at the three traditional revenue pillars in football, so match day, broadcasting, and commercial. We'll start with match day, and Mario, I'll come to you first. So I think we know from research and anecdotally that the match day attending audience for women's football it's a different audience demographic. It does tend, relative to men's football attendances, tends to skew more female, family, younger, more upwardly mobile, newer fans to the sport perhaps. So I'd love to kind of get a picture from you on what you guys are doing on match day to try to drive attendances, what that looks like from the Como lens.
Yeah, it's really, you said it already, it's catering to a different audience. So really everything we try to do is responding to the desires that we think the fans that are coming to consume this product want. And because the demographic for women's football is different, so should be the stadium experience. And honestly, so should the broadcast experience, the merchandising strategy, everything you do around it should be done through a lens that caters to a different audience. In Como specifically, what we do is really not rocket science in the sense that we're copying, honestly, a lot of what's happening in the WSL and other more developed leagues, which is trying to build an experience that feels much more open, inclusive than going to an Italian men's game, Serie A, at 9 p.m. And if it's a Champions League game in the weekday, it's completely different than the family-friendly experience you get at Como. Now, it doesn't always have to be that way. That's just the audience that turns out to our club. So we try to deliver by simply making the experience catered to what they want. And that could be from the food and beverage offerings, from the merchandising offerings, from the prices of the tickets themselves. It's simply kind of a completely different product for a different audience.
Are you able to give any small examples of, food and beverage that is different or kind of?
Yeah, I feel like I'm stealing my co-founder's lines, but she always comes to the stadium and says, I don't want just beer. And she sometimes may want a latte at a concession stand, and no, a traditional club doesn't really offer that. The merchandising effort, like if you're a mom with 2 kids and you show up and you just see men's jerseys displayed and that's the only thing that's being sold to you, that may not feel like the most inviting way. Can I park my pram somewhere, and can I get some help from the stewards if I'm coming with the kids? Like, all of these things are seemingly small touch points that together make a huge difference in inviting and welcoming that different public. So those are the 3 that come to mind, but I think it even starts at the moment of how we market the experience and invite these people in.
Jackie, I want to ask you about this as well, because you have been covering the NWSL. You've experienced lots of matches played in the US and seeing all the innovative things that clubs are doing there to drive attendance. And the NWSL really is a great league in terms of kind of average median attendances up and down the league. So can you share some stories, examples, the kind of things you've seen that you think they're doing really well over there?
Yeah, basically when we'll show up at a stadium to do a CBS commentary, we'll get there a few hours before and the trucks are outside. And then, for example, at Washington Spirit's Audi Field ground, the trucks are there and then we'll walk around the stadium to go up towards our commentary position. And I'm going past all the stalls where they're setting up under one of the stands, and they have fußball tables, and they have popcorn stalls, they have local merchandise, local street sellers. So they're bringing in local business and allowing them to sell their products. And it's not just, we have to be a little bit careful of not just making out as women and children and families that go to women's football. It's all sorts of people. So there are high tables there for beers, so people can meet up, buy a beer, meet up with their friends. They might be sitting in a completely different part of the stadium, and that doesn't matter. They meet up, they might strike up a conversation with new fans, meet other fans, become friends with them. Merchandise stalls, I mean, the queues around the block after Washington Spirit games for hoodies, for all sorts of paraphernalia, and they're making money this way. And obviously, in football, you can't guarantee how a team is going to play, whether they're going to have a good day at the office. You can't guarantee results, obviously, but people want to go for an experience as well. So if you can guarantee pretty much that you're going to go and have a nice time and meet up with the people you met a couple of weeks ago, or meet up with some friends of yours, or tell your kids' classmates to come along and meet up with them too, or your mates or whatever, and then you meet up with them before and you play football. There's soft play for the kids, for goodness sake, while the parents are there at the beer stalls. There's all sorts of different things to do. Then you go to the game, and then you can take hot dogs in, or people are coming around and selling you food that you might want from your seat, and beers and what have you. And half the time that I'm standing on the platform overlooking one of these stadiums, Snapdragon in San Diego as well with the palm trees. Okay, we can't replicate that over there. But you're looking up and you're seeing these platforms and positions where people are socializing and having drinks and nice types of food, healthy types of food, all sorts of different non-British football-specific kind of burgers and pies and all the stuff that you've always had. Different options. People just enjoying themselves. And I'd be looking out thinking, I want to come here with my husband, I want to come with my kids, I want to come with my friends. And I think if we can try and think differently about how we do things, and I've seen it here over the years, many years ago, Chelsea at Kingsmeadow, and did some sort of talking or something where there were kids kicking balls around and meeting up with Katie Chapman and meeting players, and stuff was going on, activations. And I just think if you can attract people along for different reasons other than just the football, you've got a better chance of keeping them engaged, keeping them involved. Obviously, brands can get involved with selling their products, getting fans on board with hoodies and whatever else they want to do. And I just think that bigger picture-wise, when we're trying to promote the women's game and see it as the huge, enormous commercial opportunity that probably most of us in this room probably think it is, and on this panel, then we need to think differently to how we've always done things and not always be hamstrung by, well, I used to go and watch Wolverhampton Wanderers home and away from 35 years ago onwards on trains all over the country. Things were always done a certain way. There are so many opportunities to do things differently in the women's game.
Yeah, I do think that in America they're very, very good at leaning into the entertainment side of sport and entertainment. And I also feel maybe this is a cultural thing, but audiences are also more relaxed about being monetized. Perhaps they've just been born that way, fleeced, exactly. But probably a lot more open to the test and learn culture than maybe we're seeing this side of the Atlantic. Looking at broadcasting, and I'm going to tag on social media to this because I think social media is a really important part of the women's game. But just looking at more traditional broadcasting and just going off of what you've been talking about, your experience with covering the NWSL, how is it different there from a broadcasting perspective? What are broadcasters doing there to kind of commercialize the game or grow the game quicker? What's their role? And what is your role as a presenter?
Yeah, it's been so interesting doing the CBS broadcast, and I commentate Fox Sports on major tournaments, men's and women's as well. It's just really interesting seeing how Americans do things compared to how we do things here. And I would say the main difference is that every what feels like 2 minutes, I'll get a tap on the shoulder from the floor manager handing me a card of something to promote. And that's the big difference, is that during the commentary, you're promoting stuff. And when you're there presenting pre-match as well, and headphones off and earphones in and what have you, and then suddenly you're commentating on the game and then you get a card about something. So it's just juggling. But the main thing is you're getting in broadcast messages during the commentary. Now, I know there would probably be some resistance in this country because we're very set in our ways, the way football should be done, but the Americans have got used to it. They are used to being sold to during the games. And I think if you do it well, and if you do it cleverly, and you don't do it clunkily, and you're not crowbarring in adverts that take away from the pictures every 30 seconds, and I think that's key, then absolutely you can bring more brands on board. So, for example, little things like the clock turns into stoppage time, you see that there's going to be 3 minutes of stoppage time. And instead of saying as a commentator, and we're into a minimum of 3 minutes of stoppage time, I'll say we're into a minimum of 3 minutes of stoppage time sponsored by Horizon, presented by Verizon, rather, and different brands for different things. And I think as long as you do it carefully, I think that's okay. In fact, I think it's good because you're getting investment in the game and in the broadcast. The other key thing, which is alien to me, and I've never seen it in this country, but I'm all for, I don't know whether the guys in this country are up for it or not, is cross-promoting the different networks. So, for example, tonight I'm commentating for TNT, but if it was America, I'd be saying, so tomorrow night we have Chelsea versus Manchester City on TNT Sports 1, and on Saturday you can catch WSL coverage on Sky Sports from 11:30. It's Manchester United versus whoever. So that's something that they do, that they collectively got together, the 4 different broadcast partners, and said, well, Friday nights is Amazon NWSL night. They say, and you can watch San Diego Wave against Trinity Rodman's Washington Spirit. Again, that's another thing, is they're big on promoting the stars, the US stars who won the Olympics. And I have lines that I have to get in to say that kind of stuff. And it's so new to me, but I completely understand why they're doing it. And I do think we can introduce that in this country if we do it carefully and not sort of crowbarring stuff in and not bombarding the audience. But I do think we can grow commercially in broadcasting as well in that regard.
Yeah, it's really interesting what you say about the cross-marketing. Just sort of that mentality of we're different networks, but we're all in this together. If we row in the same direction, we're going to build this pie faster.
Because they see it's good for them, for everyone else to be watching Friday night on Amazon and Saturday on ESPN, because then they'll come back to us on CBS next time. But they all buy into that. So that's a collective agreement that they all have. It would be like here, say, BBC and ITV covering the Women's Euros, and tonight it's England versus Switzerland, and tomorrow night on the BBC or on ITV, you can watch X, Y, and Z. We don't do that here. I understand why we don't. I'm not saying we should, but it's just interesting that that's how they do it.
And Luca, I want to come to you from the player agency perspective on social media, because clearly it's becoming a really, really important part of the women's game, and definitely in the player space in terms of them now having a platform to really do their own individual brand building, and what that brand building then translates into in terms of what they're able to negotiate vis-a-vis clubs or with an individual brand that's looking to sponsor a player. I'd love to hear from you kind of what you're seeing, what the trends are. Obviously, I think a Lioness or a big name international player can now easily attract a blue chip brand. But what about the others? What are the opportunities that you are seeing for the players who maybe are just kind of that next rung down? What does that look like?
Sure. I was just getting comfy with listening to everyone. There is the trend, and I mean, when we sign a player, one of the first things we do is a social media audit, and we go through all everything that they've done up until now. We demonstrate what's been good for them and what does well generally across the market as well. We give them a load of do's and don'ts. But it's all about, nowadays that social media is such a platform for them to, it's their own personal billboard. You think of way back when everybody was fighting to get a billboard at some time or another. Now everybody has their own personal billboard to build their own personal brand, and personal branding is now becoming more and more relevant. But it's not just from a commercial lens as well. We've had a couple of bad experiences where they may be portraying something that we don't think is necessarily great for them too, which is then put clubs off, in when they're recruiting at the same time, because they don't want to necessarily be attracting a certain player that may have different personality traits that don't align with what they're trying to bring into the team. So it's really important, one, that you're portraying what you want to attract commercially, but secondly, it's also a professional platform, and that's what is also quite challenging, especially when recruiting the youngsters, is going through that education process of going from football as a hobby with, when you're a kid after school, to going into where football is then a profession. So we go through that with the parents as well, but then the byproduct is also your social media. When you grow up with just interacting with your friends on social media, to then when you become, a budding, a talent at 16, 17, you have to really tailor what you're actually putting out as you're trying to, get a job as an 18-year-old. You can't necessarily be, putting out stuff that isn't going to attract you to clubs.
And do you get any resistance from some players who just want to play and perhaps don't want to spend a lot of their time sitting around when they're not playing or training, trying to come up with clever things to post
all the time,
in order to do their brand building? So so what do you guys do to help players who maybe aren't naturally inclined to do that?
I mean, Alessia hates it. Alessia hates doing anything, TikTok and all that sort of stuff. She just likes going home and switching off. But then we've got other players that absolutely love it. I mean, we've got a couple of players up at Newcastle, Lois Joel and Izzy Sibley, and they just started on TikTok in the summer. They just started playing golf, and they are awful at golf. But the content that they're putting out is really funny, and so they got traction then from a couple of brands. We have a golf division within Wasserman who sent them loads of clubs, and now they're almost becoming golf influencers in the summer. But I have to kind of remind them that you're a professional footballer. So we get the balance of both. We have a full social media team that look after all of that stuff. I don't even try and pretend to be an expert. I posted today that I was speaking today. I think it was the first time I posted in months. So, it is a massive part of what we do, but it's just a cog in the wheel. When we talk about having to approach the game in different ways, I think there was a fan study a study that mentioned that the commercial model. I mean, you guys will be able to tell me a little bit different, but the men's game is 60% broadcast in terms of revenues, 20% commercial, 20% match day. In the women's game, it's 60% commercial, 20% match day, 20% broadcast. So there's a heavy dependency on this commercial model and trying to change the game, and that's what we have to really tap into. I mean, Alessia just is doing something with Hellman's. It was announced yesterday. It was the corniest social media thing, and Hellman's wasn't necessarily, within our brand, target list, but they're going to be heavily promoting around the Euros. And so sometimes we have a plan as to what we want to attract and where we're going after, but it's also balanced with what's going to be great for her and great for the game. Hellman's really wants to heavily activate around the Euros, and so it was a really good one to be a part of.
So keeping on the commercial revenue pillar theme then, Mario, I'd like to ask you, because obviously from the outside looking in, it does seem that you guys have done a huge amount of work focusing on commercial and driving that revenue and, rebranding, building what I think you would describe as a lifestyle brand, not just a football club brand. So what are you seeing? What is shifting? What are brands now looking for, from the club perspective, what are brands now looking for when they want to come in and invest and take advantage of the growth of the women's game?
Yeah, really being part of the journey. I think the biggest difference, back to this theme that women's football is still in startup mode, is that we can, and there are some notable exceptions, but at least for us at Como, we can't really sell eyeballs today. Like, if you come sponsor the team, it's not like we're going to give you visibility to millions of people who are tuning in to watch our games. So it's really, how do I convince the brand to come be part of the growth journey with us? So it's much more of a future-oriented pitch and aligning the values of their organization and of their public, whoever that may be, or the audience that they're trying to cater, to the work that we're doing at the club. And there's a really common theme between what Luca and Jackie were saying, that in the women's game, people really want to follow athletes' stories. That's a shift that if you're anchored in the traditional legacy thinking of football, that club comes above all and then the players are there to serve the club, very different than the way that people are consuming modern athletes. And when you look at other commercial lifestyle success stories, you know, what Caitlin Clark has done for the WNBA trumps in 2 years what a lot of organizations try to do over the past 20. We're kind of hunting or trying to fabricate that. You can't really artificially fabricate it, but it's how do we make it easier for these players to tell those stories in the service of the club building a brand that's appealing to the ultimate consumer.
And when you are in conversation with brands, is there a big piece of that which revolves around value alignment? Is that coming up time and again?
Absolutely, but without it falling into, this is not a CSR charity investment, which is the difference. So I'm not coming to a brand saying, do it because it's good for you, and you probably have to check some box and virtue signal to the market that you're supporting women's football. We're coming here to tell them, hey, half of, and I'll say a candid example of Como, half of Italy, Italian women, haven't really been spoken to by this sport. We're about to go change that. It might take time and investment until we can actually reach the audiences that you need to reach. But that audience will remember who was here first. So if I'm pitching an Italian, I don't know, bank, I'll tell them, this is the once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to be the first to come in, and that market and that audience will remember that you were here funding the transformation and the growth. So it's a very different pitch that if I show up on the men's side and I'm Juventus and I just say, put your logo here, 10 billion people will see it a year. Totally different conversation. Yeah. So it is absolutely values aligned, but again, it's not a charity investment. It's really, there is ROI there. It's just a different type of ROI with different timings. Does that track with what you think from the Wasserman point of view?
Yeah, and I wanted to echo your point about the fans with following the players. Like it's also recognizing, you know, where we are in that women's football is still super new. You know, so you don't have the history of like your grandmother or your mother supporting a club. These new fans into the game have aligned with players at different moments, and so the Lionesses was a big one, and then they aligned themselves to players that they liked, and then dispersed amongst the clubs. Equally, it's also clubs recognise that in their recruitment as well. Like when we did Naomi to Chelsea, like was that also to tap into a huge US market that are now huge Chelsea fans? Like absolutely.
Ravina, I want to ask you the question as well. I know you've done a lot of work with sponsors and on the brand side. So from that perspective, what do you think brands are looking for? How do you think they're trying to best take advantage of what is now very much a growth industry?
Yeah, I mean, I come from a very traditional agency sports background and sponsorship background, I guess, and I constantly had found myself justifying to brand activation teams these massive sponsorship partnerships that were driven by traditional media value metrics. And I think value really meant and still does mean so much more than just pure eyeballs. And we talk about this, everyone in this room knows the women's sport fan being much more, I'm going to steal Maggie's term, sticky. They're much more likely to engage and engage with the brand and take value from the fact that sponsor's investing in women's sport. But equally, it's more than that. It's really about a new generation of sports fan. So this new generation of fan that's grown up with tech, with 24/7 sports. They want more from sports than just the game. And it's everything around that the authentic stories, you mentioned sort of the focus on the players. That's where the real opportunity in women's sport is, to sort of move away from that traditional model. And that's what brands have been asking for. If you look at even like the Olympic sponsorship, how many brands have stepped away from that because they're really focused on media valuations. They want that connection, that collision between the values alignment. And that's where we should be helping them as well, and looking at the way we structure partnerships being much more about content and other things around that than we did in the past.
And do you find that there's a lot more focus on the activations then, and how that then translates on match day through the broadcasting?
Yeah, 100%.
How are you seeing that?
for so long we'd always talk about sort of how you should spend a third on your investment and 2/3 on activation, but no one ever did. Whereas now, really, that is shifting, and I think that's why, again, you come back to a commercial structure that isn't solely based on media valuations, because we don't consume women's sport in the same way. You can actually be much more creative in the way you're structuring these partnerships and really drive value. So how can I actually, as an Adidas or a Nike, how can my investment really drive more shoe sales? And that is really how we can do that in a much more holistic and natural way in the women's sports space.
I'm going to move us on now to player compensation and development, a very hot topic. Maria, I'm going to go to you first as a club owner. Obviously, it's a real juggling act to have to spend money. Obviously, you want to buy talent. In order to actually have success on the pitch, you need to invest in a squad if you have any hope of winning any trophies. So you need the talent, you need to invest, but ultimately you also have to balance the books. And as an investor, you are looking to try to get to sustainability as quickly as possible. So how does Brera think about that balancing act? Kind of what is your platform view on how you do that?
Yeah, of course. So one of the pros of being, both a men's as well as a women's MCO is that we can save on certain costs by, sharing facilities, and then that will in turn be cheaper on the women's side. So it's all about kind of cost allocation, which would then allow us to budget more resources towards player wages. But just to kind of tie, what I'm saying now, along with kind of the themes of, content creation and athletes being, influencers, ambassadors, I think it is really important to keep the athletes happy because they also bring in commercial revenues as individual, people and influencers. And a lot of this is being driven kind of out of the US or North America as well. I mean, we saw during the Olympics the massive impact that Ilona Maher had on women's rugby. Just creating a couple of TikToks, a couple of Instagrams, and boom, she just gets so many sponsorships. It's the Caitlin Clark effect of bringing in all this fresh capital to the WNBA, and suddenly the WNBA is one of the hottest properties and fastest growing properties in the world. And I think that's kind of having a ripple effect to the investment world as well, as we think about who can we invest in to not only, be on the pitch, but as well be a brand ambassador for who we are. So we, a bit of an esoteric investment, but we own a women's team in North Macedonia, and the president of the team is actually a player manager as well. So we wanted to really invest in her because she also features for the North Macedonian women's team. And the team was the champions of the first half of the season, which means that whoever wins by the end of the season gets to qualify for the Champions League, and that brings in additional dollars to us as investors.
Real quick, Luke, I'm seeing this very big red countdown clock here.
I know.
I'm just going to ignore it. Just a quick word from you. Would love to hear your thoughts on how you play that from the agency side. So clearly you're representing talent, and you've got a conversation you have to have with clubs.
Yeah, I'm the bad cop in this situation. Sorry, guys.
It's their problem to balance the books. You've got to get your player the best deal. How does that conversation go for you?
Yeah, it's tough because, well, sometimes in a transaction as well, we represent both sides. So we actually do have to kind of understand, and we do understand both sides of the coin. But at the same time, fundamentally, we're player side. So we're looking out for the best interest of the club, whilst these guys of the player, whilst these guys are looking out for the best interest of the club. So there is a balance to it. Where the game's going now, though, with more money flooding in, there is a little bit of understanding where these players are also assets. So if there is moments where clubs do need to cash in on an asset if they are wanting to leave, then there should be no hard feelings in doing so. We unfortunately were on the wrong side of a coin with Julie's Angel City on Monday night. With a player from Crystal Palace, which was unfortunate because 2 months' time, that's going to be an expiring asset for them. So whilst there's some people that complain about the money and the business side not necessarily being there from a women's sport. I argue that, as do these guys. But it's hard when also there isn't understanding in that process of, if you've got an expiring asset, sometimes you've got to make a business decision.
Do you want to say a quick word?
Yeah, I have like
Please.
10 seconds. But I guess the point I was going to make is I'm not necessarily convinced that balancing the books is the value maximizing thing for a club at this stage of development in the game. So I think
Fair,
that's
very fair.
It's not a dichotomy, because in a way, if I underinvest in the players and in the infrastructure, then the quality of the underlying experience that we're trying to convince the world to come tune into isn't going to grow. And if that doesn't grow, then the flywheel doesn't get going and nothing works. So I think that actually is quite a divisive thing when you look at the landscape of owners, which is there are some owners that are very willing to invest today, fund losses. And like, I'm not holding my teams to an expectation of profitability, because the underlying thesis is that over our holding period, the underlying value of the asset will go tremendously. So it's perfectly rational for me to come in and say, I actually do think the players should, not just the salaries, we should build infrastructure for the players if we expect the game to get better. And profitability isn't really the short-term metric to anchor on, as long as the underlying metrics, the audiences, the quality of the game being played on the pitch, the experience that the players are having as part of the club is increasing. And I think the Angel City examples are precisely what give us confidence of that. I don't think they've been profitable. They've still seen a 50x increase in the valuation and a very successful investment for those investors. So profitability just isn't the metric that I would necessarily anchor on.
Yeah, it's
I
a very
think
good
just the
point.
last one would be, like, most people see that, the returns are when they qualify for Champions League, they win trophies. There's an element of
The growing
investment to
fandom
get
around
there.
that and everything.
So trying to be self-sustaining prior to achieving that, I think we've seen historically here in the men's game too, like, teams have over-invested in order to get to that place first. So.
Yeah. Jackie, I'm going to go to you then for one last view here. If anyone wants to go get a coffee, you're welcome to. But Jackie, crystal ball time. 2030, what is the vision for women's football? Where do you see it going? And what do you think, what key things have to change today in order to realize that vision?
The key things that need to change immediately are the mindset of people who've always done things a certain way and are thinking about, what am I getting back for my money now if I invest in this women's team? What am I going to get back tomorrow? You don't think that about other businesses or even about men's football. And by the way, what about the tens of millions of pounds that are being hemorrhaged out of the men's game to agents, no offence. But that doesn't seem to be part of the conversation. Or they turn a blind eye to all that money that just vanishes that nobody seems to talk about. Or from once in a blue moon, there'll be an article on agents' fees. And you're like, what? This is hemorrhaging for the men's game. So if we're thinking about the future of the women's game, think about the potential, the commercial potential. It's not about, oh, they're there, we need to let girls play, let women play, let's be nice to women and let them be included. Any more than women in football and having women on boards is about being nice to women. No, it's about making your organisation better. So if you invest now and you think big and you invest in physios, in not just wages and getting the best player from across the pond, we'll give her all the money, and then the player who needs to feed her the ball for her to score, she can be on a fraction of the money. No, think bigger, invest in the infrastructure, and think about, if you want a return on your investment, your business people, fine. Think about that down the line. When Brighton signed a player from Paraguay for not very much money, they're thinking about their investment down the line. They're not going to get it back tomorrow, but they will get it back. And as a result, Brighton are growing and doing amazing things. And by the way, they're one of the most diverse clubs in the country. So the examples are there. Think big. Expand in the right areas, put the foundations in place while also signing players who can help you now. And think about the fans and think about not just doing things the way they've always been done, but think about how you can do things differently. The women's game is different. It's a blank canvas. Let's get amongst it. Rant over.
I think it was an absolutely brilliant way to finish. Just thank you to all these fantastic panelists. Thank you guys for sticking around and listening. Sorry we ran out of time. We can't do questions, but feel free to tackle these guys afterwards if you do have any questions. And I've been told that I have to say that it's now a coffee break, I think in number 9 upstairs, but please come back at 10 past, because I don't even know what time it is now, but...
It's 5.5 minutes.
Okay, well, there you go. 5 minutes. Thank you very much.